The show is being made too soon. The casting's all wrong. The writers haven't read the books. These are just a few of the overwhelming number of controversies surrounding the new HBO series. Today, I want to give you my honest opinion. Right now, there's a lot of information floating around. Some facts, some opinions. But whichever way you slice it, the fandom is obviously pretty divided. Which is why I think it's time for me, as a Harry Potter content creator, to tell you how I really feel about the show. The good, the bad, and the ugly. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. To kick things off, let's briefly take a look at what this show is meant to be. Basically, we're looking at a full-scale television reboot of J.K. Rowling's 7-book saga, a decade-long, big-budget retelling that's promising to stay far closer to the novels than the original films ever could. The idea is simple but ambitious. Give every subplot, every side character, and every bit of Wizarding World lore the time it never got on the big screen. Each season will be authentic to the original books and bring Harry Potter and these incredible adventures to new audiences around the world, while the original, classic, and beloved films will remain at the core of the franchise and available to watch globally. We are delighted to give audiences the opportunity to discover Hogwarts in a whole new way. Harry Potter is a cultural phenomenon, and it's clear there is such an enduring love and thirst for the Wizarding World. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this sounds pretty compelling. Harry Potter IP is about as valuable as it gets, and if we just consider the success of the books and films, making a show feels like the obvious next step. The Harry Potter novels sold over 600 million copies worldwide, and the film series went on to gross more than $7.7 billion globally. For an entire generation, Harry Potter really was what Star Wars was for the generation before it. And if you still aren't convinced, Harry Potter even dominated the gaming space when Hogwarts Legacy became the best-selling game of its release year. But even though the films were hugely successful, the fact remains that they were forced to compress massive novels into just a couple of hours of screen time. This of course meant that a ton of book material never made it to the big screen. Characters like Peeves, Winky, Ludo Bagman, and Charlie Weasley were completely absent. Major storylines like Spew, Neville's visiting his parents at St. Mungo's, and much of Voldemort's backstory through the Pensive Memories were either shortened dramatically or cut entirely. And that's just a tiny snippet of what was left out. A television format would finally give the story the room to breathe that it always deserved. But of course, things aren't always as straightforward as they might seem. And as more information about the show has been revealed, fan opinion seems to have only become more and more divided. This can be attributed to a number of different variables, which I'm going to run you through, giving my thoughts along the way. The first big controversy surrounding the new show relates to the production team. Now, I'd like to start off by saying that on the whole, the production team looks pretty good. The series is being led by Francesca Gardner, who will serve as showrunner and executive producer. Gardner has an impressive resume, having worked as a writer and producer on several major television projects, including Succession, His Dark Materials, and Killing Eve. Joining her is Mark Mylod, who will direct multiple episodes of the series and also serve as an executive producer. Mylod also comes from the Succession team and has directed some of the show's most celebrated episodes. Beyond that, he has experience directing high-profile television across a variety of genres, including Game of Thrones, The Last of Us, and Shameless. From an industry perspective, it's clear that Warner Bros. And HBO went out and recruited some experienced talent to lead the project. They even got the green light from J.K. Rowling, who, after reading their pilot script, announced that the show will more than live up to its expectations. However, things became a bit more complicated when it was announced that Andy Greenwald would also be joining the writing team. Andy Greenwald is a television critic, writer, and podcaster, best known for his work in entertainment journalism and TV show creation. Greenwald is also known for co-hosting the popular podcast The Watch on the Ringer Network alongside Chris Ryan, where they discuss TV, movies, and pop culture trends. And it was on an episode of his podcast that Greenwald revealed a harrowing detail, at least from the fans' perspective, about his history with Harry Potter. You see, Greenwald, who was recently revealed as a writer for the upcoming show, let it spill that he has never read the books. And the biggest problem here is that the TV show is supposed to be a faithful adaptation of these books. The series will be a faithful adaptation of the beloved Harry Potter book series by author and executive producer J.K. Rowling. The series will feature a new cast to lead a new generation of fandom, full of the fantastic detail and much-loved characters Harry Potter fans have loved for over 25 years. Andy said the following, that I think the pleasures that can be derived from that are probably not going to be for me, because I didn't read all the books. I read them to my older daughter until she could read them for herself, and then she dusted me, and I think maybe there's some other creative possibilities within this world. He also went on to compare the potential of a Harry Potter show to Netflix's Avatar show, and criticised the way Max broadcast the showrunner finalists. This is upsetting for a few reasons. First of all, how can we expect someone to faithfully adapt the books into a TV series when they haven't read said books? It would be one thing for him to work on a project in the same universe that, say, took a different direction, but for him to be involved with what is essentially a more book-accurate recreation seems highly unusual. My obvious question is, why is a writer who hasn't even read the books involved in a project whose entire purpose is to faithfully adapt them? I suppose Andy can just read them, but why he would want to be involved in the first place if he doesn't know the source material is just another question altogether. I also feel like this is only one example of a broader concern among fans, that the show is being treated as a reinterpretation rather than the faithful adaptation promised. Warner Bros. And HBO have repeatedly emphasized that the show will remain extremely close to the source material. In fact, the entire premise of the reboot is built around the idea that television can finally do what the films couldn't: adapt the books properly with the time and detail they deserve. A true adaptation attempts to translate the original material from one medium into another while preserving the core structure of the story, the characters, the themes, and the narrative progression. A reinterpretation, on the other hand, tends to treat the original story more like a framework, something that can be reshaped, expanded, or altered depending on the creative vision of the writers. And right now, it's not entirely clear where this new Harry Potter series will land on that spectrum. Because while the show has been marketed as a faithful retelling, there have also been hints that the writers may explore new material that wasn't present in the books. For example, showing Draco Malfoy home at Malfoy Manor in the very first season. This is something that's already been confirmed by actor Lox Pratt, who is taking on the role of Draco. I think with this adaptation, you get to see so much more than the books, said Pratt during an interview with 1883 magazine. The books are very much over Harry's shoulder, which is great, and that's how they played in the film as well. And I think showrunner Francesca Gardner and director Mark Mylod have been vocal about this in their interviews. There's just so much more that you get to see. You get to see all the teachers in their little rooms. You get to see Draco at home. I won't spoil too much about that, but there are some brilliant scenes at home where you start to get an insight into how he is. Now, strictly speaking, adding scenes that are not present in the novels might appear to contradict that idea. However, I do think there's an important distinction to be made between contradicting canon and expanding on it in a way that supports the story. Showing Draco at home, for example, doesn't inherently alter the narrative. It simply visualizes something the books implied but never directly depicted. And honestly, if this is done well, it could actually benefit the show rather than harm it. That said, this is also where things could go horribly wrong. One of the reasons Harry Potter works so well is because the story unfolds almost entirely through Harry's perspective. The mystery, the tension, and the discovery of the wizarding world all happen alongside him. So once you start stepping outside that viewpoint, there's a real risk of losing one of the story's most important narrative strengths. Furthermore, if early Malfoy Manor scenes over-explain Draco or push too hard towards sympathy too early, it could weaken his arc. Draco isn't meant to be liked in Philosopher's Stone, nor are we meant to feel sorry for him. These are all considerations that wouldn't need to be made if the show simply followed the faithful adaptation approach it's been marketed as. If the show starts prioritizing new content over the story that made Harry Potter successful in the first place, then we may end up with something that feels less like an adaptation and more like a reinterpretation, and that's exactly what I'm hoping they avoid. It's certainly a fine line. But on the flip side of all of that, the set leaks from the show so far are very encouraging. One detail in particular that caught the attention of many fans involves the courtyard hedges at Hogwarts. Shaped into the greenery are the house emblems: a lion for Gryffindor, a badger for Hufflepuff, a serpent for Slytherin, and crucially, an eagle for Ravenclaw. While this may sound like just a tiny, inconsequential detail, it's actually a strong signal that the showrunners are taking book accuracy seriously, because it corrects one of the film's most debated departures from the books. In the movies, Ravenclaw's symbol was changed to a raven, and the house colours were altered to blue and silver. But in the books, Ravenclaw is represented by an eagle with the colours blue and bronze. The fact that the show appears to be restoring that detail tells me the creators are paying very close attention to textual accuracy. And if that level of care extends to the rest of the series, it could be a very promising sign indeed. Next, let's address what is arguably the crux of the division within the fandom, the show's casting. The big issue? A series can't be both faithful and make casting decisions that contradict this statement. Papa Sidhu, who's been cast as Snape, is not by any stretch of the imagination a book-faithful representation of Snape. And things get particularly weird when we look at the other casting decisions, all of whom seem to be more or less in line with what the characters from the books were supposed to look like. While I adore all of the casting decisions made in the films, not all of those were book accurate either. Ron Weasley, played by Rupert Grint, wasn't tall and lanky. Hermione, played by Emma Watson, didn't have big bushy hair and large front teeth. Horace Slughorn, played by Jim Broadbent, didn't have a huge silver walrus moustache. And perhaps most importantly, Harry Potter, played by Daniel Radcliffe, had the wrong eye colour. And many fans have pointed to these examples to argue, in defense of the new Snape, that even the original films strayed from the books. And that's true. But here's the difference. The movies never marketed themselves as faithful adaptations. They simply told the story their way, and fans called them out for it for years, which is why the decisions coming from the new series feel even more bizarre. They had a rare opportunity to learn from those past missteps, to finally deliver the book-accurate version so many fans have been waiting for. And instead, it seems like they're making the same mistakes all over again. Or at least one mistake. And that's what makes it feel even more unusual. Nearly every other casting decision for the show is pretty good, and in many cases more book-accurate than what the films gave us. If they had made other unusual casting decisions for some of the other roles, this wouldn't feel so isolated. But instead, Sidhu's casting feels entirely inconsistent, and he's left bearing the weight of that creative dissonance. That's why it's turned into a mountain out of a molehill. On the flip side of this, fortunately, a lot of the other casting decisions are actually quite good. John Lithgow, despite being American, will probably be an excellent Dumbledore, although at 80 years old, I do worry a little bit about his participation in a decade-long TV series. Janet McTeer is about as close as I could possibly imagine to McGonagall besides the original Maggie Smith. Nick Frost seems like a genuinely promising Hagrid, and even some of the younger casting choices like Lox Pratt as Draco Malfoy appear to fit the roles quite well based on the early photos we've seen so far. Obviously, all of these characters are going to feel a bit weird for someone who grew up with the films, but that doesn't mean I'm unwilling to accept change, especially when this is just a new version, not a replacement. The next big positive is the budget, as it looks like Warner Bros. Are going all in before the first episode even airs. Rumours online suggest that the series has a reported $1.2 billion budget, making it the most expensive TV show ever made. For comparison, Rings of Power spent $1 billion, and even Game of Thrones didn't come close. That money is spread over a 10-year plan, but it's going into practical effects, top-tier actors, and massive new sets. I mean, they're basically building an entire mini-city just for the show. When you think about it, the original 8 films together cost about the same, but here we're getting multiple seasons of content instead of just 8 movies. Recent set leaks also show a number of new structures being built at Leavesden Studios, the same location where much of the original Harry Potter film series was produced. From what we've seen so far, it appears that the production team is constructing expanded versions of familiar Hogwarts locations, including courtyards, walkways, and additional castle architecture that wasn't present in the films. If the goal of the show really is to create a more detailed, long-form adaptation of the books, then Hogwarts itself needs to feel bigger, more lived in, and more explorable than ever. And building a massive set is a step in the right direction. This is a big investment for what is effectively still a huge gamble, but it's encouraging to see Warner Bros. Going all in before the first episode even airs. Next, we've got episode length. One of the biggest advantages the show has over the films is simply time. Early reports suggest the first season could run between 6 and 8 episodes, with each episode lasting roughly an hour. Even on the lower end at 6 episodes, that's still around 6 hours of screen time devoted to Philosopher's Stone. And if we consider that the original film only had 152 minutes to tell the entire story, that leaves a lot of extra room for extra characters, world building, and storylines. Philosopher's Stone is also the shortest book in the series, so it's entirely possible that later seasons could end up being longer. If the show truly plans to dedicate roughly 1 season per book, it would make sense for the episode count to scale up as the story progresses. Books like Goblet of Fire, Order of the Phoenix, and Half-Blood Prince are significantly longer and far more complex than the earlier entries, with multiple subplots, new characters, and major world-building elements that the films simply didn't have time to fully explore. So while season 1 may end up being somewhere in that 6 to 8 episode range, still unconfirmed, it wouldn't be surprising at all if later seasons expanded beyond that to accommodate the increasingly dense storylines of the later books. And if that ends up being the case, the television format could finally allow the full scope of the series to unfold the way it was originally written. Now onto one of the other points of contention among fans: is it too soon for a reboot? The last Harry Potter movie, Deathly Hallows Part 2, came out in the UK July 15th, 2011. That means that when the first episode of the show airs, 16 years will have passed since the last movie was released. Now, I'll admit, in the grand scheme of things, this is a relatively short period of time. I'm not that old, and I was around for every book and film release from the original series. I'm roughly the same age as Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson, just a touch younger, and they all still feel like young people, which makes the idea of a reboot feel premature. And I suspect that for many in my situation, millennials who grew up with Harry Potter, the original films don't just feel like adaptations, they feel like the version of Harry Potter. Daniel Radcliffe is Harry, Emma Watson is Hermione, Rupert Grint is Ron. The performances of these actors have been embedded in the cultural identity of the franchise. Granted, the series is a different format, a more book-accurate, long-form adaptation, but even so, the original films still don't feel that old. I don't know what to say, that's just how I feel. But I suppose there is a reasonable argument on the other side of this. Yeah, I grew up with the films, but for a younger generation of viewers, these movies may already be starting to feel like something from the previous era of pop culture. Kids today discovering Harry Potter didn't experience the midnight book launches, the premieres, or the years-long wait between installments. They're discovering the story all at once through streaming, games, and theme parks. And from Warner Bros. Perspective, that's exactly where a reboot starts to make sense, especially if we consider runtime. The series isn't just meant to run for a season or two. The plan is for it to span roughly 10 years, with one season adapting each book. So by the time the show actually concludes, we could be looking at something like 2037. That is, if there are no hiccups. At that point, the original films will be over a quarter of a century old, and while I still think the show is a little bit premature, framing it like that does help a little. Now onto the next issue, the reboot formula. One of the things I've seen mentioned again and again online is a sort of pattern that many fans believe modern franchise reboots tend to follow. The argument goes something like this. First, a beloved franchise gets announced for a reboot or continuation. Studios promise at this time things will be bigger, better, and more faithful to the original source material. Then, early production news starts to come out, casting decisions, writing staff announcements, creative changes, and parts of the fanbase begin to worry that the project might not stay as faithful as promised. After that, criticism from fans gets labeled as overreaction or negativity, which only fuels even more online debate. The conversation then spirals into a kind of cultural tug-of-war between fans who are optimistic about the project and fans who are convinced it's already doomed. Think Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, The Witcher. Now, to be totally clear, I'm not saying that's necessarily what's happening here, but I do think it explains why so many fans are approaching this show with caution. Because people have seen versions of this play out before with other major franchises, and once that perception starts to take hold online, it becomes very hard to shake. After all, this is people's childhood memories you're messing with here. So, what do I think? I think I'm going to wait and see. There are some red flags, sure, but there are also an incredibly large number of green flags that I could honestly just never ignore as a huge Harry Potter fan. The production team is experienced, the budget is enormous, the runtime finally gives the story the breathing room the films never had, and in theory, the focal point of the series, creating a faithful adaptation, has its heart in the right place. I get why people are nervous. When you're dealing with something as culturally significant as Harry Potter, people naturally want it to be handled with care. But the reality is, it's still early days. We don't have promotional footage, we don't have full casting announcements, and most notably, we don't have a trailer. Which is why for now, I'm going to maintain cautious optimism. Sincerely, a Harry Potter YouTuber. And that's it for today's video. What do you guys think? Have you changed your mind about anything as time has gone on? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live